On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, the President of Chile has fired 8 cabinet ministers. Will it be enough to quell the deadly protests? And we talk to top Chinese scientists on how the trade war affects their research. How will China reach for the stars? And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing. We begin today's program in Chile, where at least 20 people have lost their lives amid violent anti-government protests. Despite a cabinet reshuffle announced on Monday, violent clashes between police and protesters show no signs of dying down. As the unrest enters the 13th day, what might President Sebastián Piñera do next? How did a subway fare hike trigger a massive movement against inequality? Before we ask our panelists about all of these questions, let's take a look at the streets of the Chilean capital, Santiago.
The largest ever march in Chile's history. Last Friday, close to 1 million people took to the streets of Santiago, demanding economic reforms and the resignation of President Piñera following a week of deadly protests. One of Latin America's most prosperous countries tumbled into its worst violence in decades. Metro stations were destroyed, supermarkets torched and looted, traffic lights and bus shelters smashed. Authorities deployed some 20,000 police and soldiers in Santiago, using tear gas and water cannons to disperse demonstrators. Security forces have been blamed for 5 of the 20 protest-related deaths. In an attempt to appease protesters, President Piñera reshuffled a third of the cabinet on Monday, but violent clashes broke out again several hours later.
The cabinet should have more street participation, one that has empathy, that put themselves in people's shoes. Nobody that the president's put in there fit that description.
The Chilean government said that next month's APEC trade summit in Santiago would go ahead despite the protests, where Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Donald Trump are among those expected to attend.
For the latest on the Chile crisis, we have in Boston Jorge Heine, who is a research professor at the Frederick S. Pardee School of Global Studies from Boston University. He's also a former Chilean ambassador to China. In Washington, we have Mary Cruz McGowan, economist and VP at the National Economists Club. Last but not least, in Shanghai, Jiang Shishue, director of the Center of Latin American Studies from Shanghai University. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. Professor Heine, may I start with you? How come is only $0.04 of subway fare hike led to all of these?
Yes, well, it may seem a very small factor for such a large reaction, but in fact it was only the straw that broke the camel's back. The cost of living in Chile has been increasing considerably. There was a hike in the price of electricity, 10% in June. It was announced that another 10% was coming later this year. Utilities are very expensive. Transport is very expensive. With this, the metro fare would be among the most expensive in Latin America. So, in fact, people reacted to this and said, enough is enough. And it seems to me it is important to put these things in context. People are also tired of very low pensions. So it's an overall situation in which daily life for the average Chilean, although much better than it was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It is quite true, as you said earlier in the program. Chile today is the most prosperous country in Latin America, with a per capita income of around 15,000 in nominal terms, around 23,000 in PPP terms. But cost of living is very high, and daily life for average Chilean is not easy.
Yeah. Ms. McGowan, only 17 years, if you look at how much Chilean's economy has been experiencing changes. For example, 2000, the poverty line there, 60%. But now you have only 6% of people still under the poverty line. So how do you see these changes? Would people appreciate the changes going on in the Chilean economic society?
Well, the main problem, as we know in Chile, it's not the general GDP, but the income inequality. And one of the things that determines the income inequality is the level of education and the access to higher education. And unfortunately, in Chile, has the highest tuition cost of Latin America, not only Latin America, but other similar countries in the world. So that means that only the privileged are going to college, and thus only the privileged are enjoying this economic growth, while the others are lagging behind. I think I agree with the professor. The increase in the metro in the system was just the last drop in the bucket, but what it's causing this is this increasing seeing of most of the country, most of the population, seeing just a tiny bit enjoying these benefits, while the others are being left behind, and that is not fair, and that's what it's perceived.
Professor Heine, if I could come back to you, because you're originally coming from Chile.
Sure.
You know, if you look at the university fares that the parents and students need to pay, the tuition was also high, is also high right now inside the United States, and there were enormous complaints about that too. So we've seen the inequality has been a big problem in many countries around the world, but this time something, would you say it's out of proportion, or this is something building for a long time? And what is the solution for this? Because the solution could also have to be long term.
Of course. No, quite rightly so. The point is the following. The situation of university fees, which, you know, are driven basically by a university system that is for profit. You know, in Chile there are about 70 universities, and many of them are for profit, which is not a good university system. The government of President Bachelet, one of her 3 major reforms, the other 2 were tax reform and constitutional reform, was to reform the higher education system. And nowadays, progress is being made, and quite a number of students are not paying these very high fees. I think it's around 40%, but we still have a long way to go. So that is only one aspect of the changes that need to be made in a society that has gone too much in the direction of, we have moved basically from a market economy to a market society, and there is something there that has gone wrong. So measures need to be taken to address that. In addition to higher education, I would argue that the tax system is something that needs major reform, because right now it doesn't help to alleviate inequality.
I would like to address a similar question to Mr. Jiang. As an observer and certainly an expert on Latin American studies from China, how do you look at, you know, the changes going on in the Chilean society? After all, it is a country that has been benefiting from, let's just say, the copper trade for a long time, quite some time, and we see the wealth in the country. But the solutions, once again, it's long term. So would any of these that we see on the streets in Chile help solve the problem, Professor Jiang?
Well, as you know, that we have the terminology which is called the East Asian tigers. Okay, Singapore, South Korea. And in South America, we often say Chile is Latin American tiger. So Chile is considered as one of the successful stories in terms of its economic reforms since 1973. And personally, I even published a few papers describing how the economic reforms were going on. And yes, there were some aspects which can be considered as successful. But on the other hand, we need to point out that there are some kind of side effects. You know, the World Bank has said that its security reforms, social security reforms, was one of the best in the world. And in the plaza in front of the palace of the president, I met with a big delegation from one of the Chinese provinces. I asked them, why are you here? They said they are in Chile to learn from the reform experiences of the social security reforms. But you know, no reform can be 100% perfect. So there are some kind of side effects of reforms. One of the most serious side effects is the lack of government regulation in certain sense. Okay, so the market force plays a very, very important role, but the government is becoming less and less important, particularly in the area of social service, all kinds of things. So now we have seen the last straw on the camel's back.
Certainly, it is a lot of food for thought.
May I comment on that?
Please, go ahead.
Yes. Yes. Now, let me say the following. I think we have made in Chile a number of very significant reforms, and we have opened the economy, created many job opportunities. It's a very dynamic economy in many ways. We have reached out to the Asia Pacific. We have free trade agreements with more countries than any other country in the world. All of this is fine and dandy. But some of the reforms have been quite wrong-headed. I would argue that the private pension schemes that exist have been a great fiasco. You know, the average pension that was paid last year to males was around $200 a month. For a country as expensive in Chile, that doesn't allow you to get to the end of the month. It's not really a social security system. It's forced individual savings, which is something different. And one of the big demands of people in the streets right now is for the elderly in Chile to get a decent pension.
I see. As we are speaking, we are also having some breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. Chilean President Sebastian has been announcing over the past few hours on Wednesday, Chile would suspend the hosting of the APEC Trade Summit in November and the COP25 Climate Summit in December after several weeks of violent unrest. Now, this is the breaking news. Once again, we would like to share with every one of you. Chilean President Sebastian Pinera said on Wednesday that the country would suspend the hosting of the APEC Trade Summit in November and the COP25 Climate Summit in December, as several weeks of unrest taking place in the country. This is breaking news, certainly, as we've been discussing about the latest situation in Chile, ladies and gentlemen. So may I have your immediate response? Now, let's go to Mr. Heine, please. Professor.
Yes, yes. I think it is unfortunate. I think the hosting of the APEC summit this year was the second time that Chile was going to host it. The first time was in 2004. Chile has been a member of APEC since 1994. It was the second Latin American country after Mexico to join APEC. We have played a leading role in APEC. This was likely to be a very significant event. Both President Trump and President Xi had confirmed their participation. So I think this is a great pity. No doubt demonstrations were likely to have been held, but you know, demonstrations are often held in places where summits take place. So this should be nothing particularly new or something that couldn't be managed.
What do you make of this decision? What do you make of this decision,
unfortunate.
Professor? What do you make of this decision
I
said by the President?
I think the government, yes, I think the government is overwhelmed. It doesn't know how to cope with the situation, and I think it's a very unfortunate decision.
Okay. May I go to you, Ms. McGowan, about your immediate reaction? The Chilean president announced on Wednesday the country would suspend both the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting and also the COP25 Climate Change Summit. Your immediate response?
Well, I think that President Piñera didn't have any other choice. It's unfortunate, but I would have done the same thing. One thing that we are not talking about, and it's in reference in this international fora, is the international influence in Chile. Once it's the political environment in Latin America, which is going out, like Bolivia, for example, the case on Venezuela, and also the disagreements and a lot of disenchantment also in Brazil. Also, we didn't have protests there yet, I would say. I would not be surprised if it's coming. But also the immigration that is coming, undocumented immigration in the thousands to Chile, especially from Haiti, Venezuela, and Dominican Republic. And the government of Chile, in addition to the problems they are already facing, they have to face with this problem.
Yeah.
So I think this goes beyond Chile. That's what I am trying to say.
I see. It's much a bigger picture that people should really pay attention to. Professor Jiang, your response as well, immediate response to the news, breaking news that the Chilean president announced the country would suspend hosting of the APEC economic meetings and also the COP25 climate change meeting.
Well, for the APEC summit, I'm not sure it's only postponed or it will be cancelled.
We do not know at this time.
But in any case,
we do not know at this time.
Yeah, but in any case,
we do not know at this time whether there is going to be a follow-up about who will be the one hosting the APEC economist meeting, economic meeting. So, but your immediate response to the Chilean situation.
No, there's one very important point. In any case, that kind of news is not good news for China-U.S. relationship. You know, it's reported that China and the U.S., President Xi Jinping and President Trump will meet in the APEC summit. They're going to discuss the deal for the bilateral relationship in terms of trade dispute. So if they are not going to meet in Chile, that means that meeting will be postponed. So who knows when they will meet.
We do not know, of course, Professor Jiang, as we speak. Once again, we do not want to speak for either of the governments right now because we do not have any response yet from any of the two governments or other governments and economies that are going to participate in the APEC leaders meeting and also the APEC CEO summit. So what we know now is the President of Chile announced that the country would suspend the hosting of the APEC meetings. By the way, Chile is only the host country. It does not mean the APEC meetings will be overall suspended. We'll have to see what are the responses coming from the community of Asia Pacific and how would different economies react to this. But of course, it is a very big disappointment for many of those who are already planning on a lot of interactions at the APEC meetings because it's not just China and the United States, but also Asia-Pacific economy where it is heading for. Meanwhile, before this, finance minister, trade ministers, and various levels of governments and economies of the APEC have already meeting and trying to bring consensus to the overall discussion at the Leaders Summit. So we'll see what's going to happen from there. But let's come back
may
to our
say
topic.
Something?
Yes, let's come back to our topic about Chile. Go ahead, sir.
Sure. No, I was going to say the following. The way this works, it's not like you can say, okay, it's been suspended, the meeting in Santiago has been suspended. We shall meet the next week in Lima or in Mexico City. Summits don't work that way. The heads of government and heads of state have very busy schedules. They plan ahead with a great deal of time. So, it's not like you can reassemble 21 heads of state and government in some other location a week later. This will be quite a scramble, and we don't know when they will be able to meet again. So, this is a very complex situation.
It is a complicated situation. About that, what do you think are the circumstances that made the president to make that announcement, particularly after the reshuffling of the cabinet, which apparently has not worked, Ms. McGowan?
Well, I really think that what the people in Chile, what they are looking for is not the reshuffle of the cabinet, but they want the president Sebastián Piñera to resign. It is a little bit unfair to blame it on him all of these years of disappointment, because although he was president before, this is the second time. We cannot put all the blame on him, but I think as a symbolic measure, the people of Chile are going for his resignation, not for the cabinet's resignations. And I think they are not going to stop until that happens.
Now, from now until November, go ahead, Professor Heine, if you want to say something.
Yes, no, I want to say the following. It seems to me that the government in Chile and President Piñera has been extremely slow in reacting to the situation. The cabinet reshuffle was too little, too late. The measures that have been announced, increasing the minimum guaranteed pension, some increase in the minimum wage, are all very small things. People are expecting much more.
All right.
I heard the new Minister of Finance said that he plans to go ahead with the announced tax reform bill. The announced tax reform bill, what it does is basically decrease the taxes on the rich, which is not what people want right now. We need exactly the opposite. We need more taxes on the rich and more redistribution. So the government has been very slow, and that is why people are still on the streets and they are still complaining.
I can see the passion that many of our panelists demonstrated in the discussion. Once again, we want to recap the latest news about Chile. The Chilean president announced on Wednesday that the country is going to suspend hosting the APEC leaders meeting as well as the COP25 climate change meeting. As we know, the capital of Chile, Santiago, is an important city for the year 2019, as it is a host city for these two grand events. Now, these are very important international events. We'll see how the future would evolve. Thank you so much for the three of you helping us to understand the latest. Jorge Heine, Mary Cruz McGowan, and Jiang Shixue. We appreciate it. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, on our live program. Still to come, we talk to top Chinese scientists on how the trade war affects their research. How will China reach for the stars? Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. Next, we turn to China's efforts to promote global scientific research. On Tuesday, the second annual forum on the World Laureates Association kicked off in Shanghai. More than 60 top scientists, including Nobel Prize laureates, gathered to discuss the latest trends in science and technology. Chinese President Xi Jinping sent a congratulatory letter and called on the forum to advocate international cooperation. Tonight, we bring you interviews with two prominent Chinese scientists. First, we have Yang Peidong, a professor of chemistry and materials science. He is well known for his work in nanostructure synthesis and characterization, and his research on human colonization of Mars. Yang earned a PhD in chemistry at Harvard University in 1997, and in 2010 he was ranked as a top materials scientist and among the top 10 chemists for the decade 2000 to 2010 by Thomson Reuters. Currently, he is a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. He thinks China could adopt a mechanism that balances support for both basic and applied research. Thinking about it, I was reading some media stories about you, Professor Yang, and heard that you enjoy watching movies like Martians. You usually use movies to explain to the others the significance of your work. So if I could invite you once again to explain through movies about what exactly you're doing.
Yeah, the movie Martians actually reflects some of my research interest. Okay. My research is more on the sort of developing new materials for energy storage. More specifically, I will call them as artificial photosynthesis.
Is there an easier word for us to remember?
Well, an easy example is the sort of green leaf, right? Green leaf is doing the photosynthesis every day. So the green leaf basically take in carbon dioxide, water, and absorb the sunlight and convert them into oxygen.
That's right.
Like green plants release oxygen to the environment, but meantime they also store the CO2, the carbon, in this another chemicals called carbohydrates, right? So that's the natural photosynthesis happening in nature. What we have been working on in the past little bit over 1 decade or so is coming up with a material system that mimics this process. So right now we have this technology that we have these materials that can really take in carbon dioxide, water, and absorb the sunlight, and convert them into useful chemicals, gasolines, fuels, polymers, and then also release oxygen back to the environment. And that's why this certainly the initial sort of motivation for this research is to fight climate change.
That's right.
Because we all know the carbon dioxide is a greenhouse
So how you're
gas.
doing so far?
Well, doing great. I think we already have the proof of concept. That was probably, we announced that results 4 years ago. It caused a sensation in the general media and the scientific media. Then in the past couple of years, we slowly improved the stability, efficiency. Now our sort of artificial photosynthesis system is even better than what's happening in nature, compared to the green leaf or green plants.
Many are thinking if this could be a success, not only it's going to solve our problems these days, have renewable energy, of course, but also probably help us to explore the outer space, some say.
Yes, yes.
Going to the Mars even,
yeah.
Professor.
Yeah.
Ever thought about that?
Well, that's exactly what we're doing now. Of course, this process can be used to sort of reduce the CO2, recycle the CO2 on planet Earth. Yes. So fight the climate change, global warming, those sort of stuff. If we think about deep space and Mars, that's why it links to the movie Martians, right? If we think about it, we want to move people, live on Mars. You need to worry about many things. Of course, first of all, you need to worry about how to send people over. That's the first thing. Second thing, once people are there, you need to think about...
survive.
They have to survive. They need oxygen.
Yes.
Okay, now if you think about on Mars, basically there's no oxygen. But there are plenty of carbon dioxide and nitrogen. Just last year, we opened another NASA center. And this NASA center in Berkeley is to use our artificial photosynthetic technology to convert those carbon dioxide and nitrogen into useful chemicals eventually for the first sort of batch of crew member over on Mars. In the meantime, release oxygen.
Is there some timeline we are looking at, Professor?
The United States has the timeline within 30 years, even though Elon Musk has much shorter sort of plan.
You met him and you ever talked to him?
Not yet. Because very often we're talking to NASA scientists at this moment. Yeah.
I understand you have a lot of thoughts about the growing of talents in China and the incorporating of talents from all over the world. Tell us about it.
Recruiting talent is always very important for every country. It's just like in U.S. is immigration country. All these best students are going there to pursue their PhD degree. Recently, of course, in China, they invest a lot to recruit sort of young scientists coming back. For example, the Young Southern Talent Program.
Right.
This program is very, very powerful in terms of attract those students trained in Europe, trained in United States, or outside China. But meantime, we also notice there are some issue arise from these sort of talent recruiting process. When this program started, I think many years ago, the research ecosystem in China is not as good as now. Okay, so back then it's correct. You give some special treatment for those trained outside. Okay. But nowadays, if we look at the sort of research infrastructure, research ecosystem in China versus outside, they are more or less on the same sort of level. At current stage, we really need to think about, okay, we need to treat these young scientists equally.
So what is it to you as a scientist? And do you think that should be to a country, if I could ask you?
Basic science really need patience. Okay? As I said, the discovery very often cannot be planned. So very often it takes 5, 10, 15 years until you crack the problem. Yes. So patience is important when we're running the basic type of fundamental research. We do need to give scientists who are willing to tackle these issues time. And very often I said the sort of the profession of being a professor is great because we are founded to do things that we are interested in.
So what's the thinking behind China's science strategy, and how will it compete against the major players in the scientific field and probably cooperation as well? Let's meet another insider, Nancy Yip, a Hong Kong neuroscientist and Vice President for Research and Development at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. As a scientist in one of the most fascinating fields, the human brain, Professor Yip said that cooperation in science is necessary to improve human society. Tell me, how do you, as a scientist, see both the cooperation and particularly competition these days as a result of geopolitics when it comes to science and technology development?
So the ultimate goals of science and technology development are to advance the societies, and it's for the betterment of humankind. And this actually requires international collaboration in order to achieve the goals. But on the other hand, healthy competition, I believe, not only among countries, but also in individual laboratories within a country, is very important, and in fact it's essential in order for us to strive for excellence and continue to push the frontiers of science and technology. So I believe that collaboration and competition, they are like two sides of a coin, and they are both important in order for us to achieve the goals.
Healthy competition, of course, is always the best thing, isn't it?
Yes.
Particularly for scientists, to gear yourself up in order to find a new frontier. Yeah. However, geopolitics does play a role, and increasingly so, I'm afraid. Yeah. U.S. and China, for example. Yeah. Uncertainty about the nature of relations for the future.
Sure.
So you are a member of Chinese Academy of Sciences, yes. Also a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, not to mention some of the other roles you play worldwide. So you will see, are you concerned whether in the future that you will still be able to fulfill all these roles, free spirit, as a scientist?
I think we need to strive for that, because...
How?
Well, I think as scientists, we need to keep an open mind. There are so many grand challenges that we face today, and in order for us to find solutions to these grand challenges, we must collaborate.
Like what? In your field of neuroscience?
I mean, in my field, for example, aging population, how are we going to ensure that we have healthy aging? And in other fields like climate change and also shortage of food, new energy, etc. I mean, these are grand challenges, and it really requires multidisciplinary efforts, not only within one region but also across region. So for us to collaborate, it is necessary.
But Professor Ip, I mean, I totally understand every word that you said, and you put it so beautifully, and true also. But scientists like you work so hard in order to go the direction you just illustrated.
Right.
And yet you see the politics is dragging totally toward another direction. I mean, as a scientist, how do you see that?
Well, I think when we attend scientific conferences, when we give talks, we share with everyone our data, and we hope that by sharing our knowledge, we'll inspire new ideas. And all the scientists in Hong Kong, I believe we collaborate with scientists not only, in other countries, but also with scientists in the mainland. And I think it is really that collaborative spirit that we can continue to make new discoveries. And of course, you know, in China, we also maybe should focus on the areas that we have a niche, you know, and that would allow us to make progress faster. So I think, again, in science and technology development, I believe, you know, healthy competition is necessary.
It's the key.
It's the key, and I also believe that collaboration is also important. I mean, the two come together in order for us to make progress and in order for us to achieve the goals.
I'm sure scientists around the world knows 100% what you're talking about very well. Yeah. And on the other hand, you see different countries have their different plans about science and development and technology. For example, China used to talk about 2025. But in this government work report, you see the Chinese premier made it very clear that China have grand goals, but it's not against anyone or toward any target. So it's being articulated in a very different way. Professor Ip, during your interaction with scientists on the mainland, and also when you are doing your research, how do you see this, the way of communication vis-a-vis the goals of research? Professor Ip.
I think in the past decades, I've seen, you know, a lot of collaboration between scientists in Hong Kong and also scientists in the mainland. I have been at HKUST for 25 years. We established programs for visiting scholars, you know, for research graduate students, exchange, etc. And a good example, actually, I can give is the establishment of the state laboratories in Hong Kong and also branches of the Chinese National Engineering Research Centers in Hong Kong. So through these platforms, actually, the collaborations have been very productive. And now with the Greater Bay Area development, I believe that there will be even more opportunities for this kind of collaborations. And I think for Hong Kong scientists, this is wonderful news. I mean, for Hong Kong, you know, we have certain areas that we internationally recognize.
Like what?
Well, in Hong Kong, for example, in my field, I think
neuroscience,
yes. It is internationally recognized, and I'm the director of the State Laboratory of Molecular Neuroscience.
Scientists are the people that I really love to talk to all the time because they are really citizens of the world. That's what they are looking at. But on the other hand, Professor Ip, how do you see the demands of scientific research to be universal in a way? But on the other hand, the identity issue, the identity of the region, for example, Hong Kong, the identity of China. How does these two work together?
I believe that each has its own strengths, and I always believe in, you know, the two to complement each other. I mean, it's sort of like in the Greater Bay Area, you know, we have different cities, and each has its own strengths. So I always advocate it is better to collaborate. Then we can achieve synergism.
But you know, Professor, even about the Greater Bay Area, Professor Yip, you mentioned several times, but it's a grand plan. There's no detail yet. So where are the details going to come, and whether the details are really going to benefit neuroscience research or the areas that you in Hong Kong could really develop in terms of science and technology? When is that going to come from?
Well, I think it has to come from the grassroots level. That's my own view, because there are certain policies that have been set and announced, and it is very much welcomed by the scientific community in Hong Kong. I do agree, you know, how Hong Kong will play a role, and specifically how to do that will take some time. But it's in stages, right? First, you have certain policies that would facilitate us to collaborate. Then the scientists in Hong Kong will respond to that. And you know, they will put together these plans for deeper collaboration with scientists in the mainland. So I see a lot of excitement in the years to come.
Brilliant minds speaking up. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.